The snow fell with the hush of something sacred, soft as a prayer and just as unanswered. Jedediah Boone moved to the pines with the quiet gait of a man who had long forgotten how to make noise unless the world required it. His boots broke the white crust, slow and deliberate. A thin-limbed dog padded beside him, nose low, steam curling from its breath. The forest around them was the color of bone and ash, every tree stripped to its soul, every sound swallowed in snow. Jed wore a coat that had seen years of wind and blood, stitched and re-stitched by his own hand. His rifle lay slung across his back, more habit than need this deep into winter. He was hunting, though he didn't expect to find much, not with the sky pressing down and the animals burrowed in. The mountain had grown stingier over the years, same as the people below it. He paused where the trail split, looking left to where a ridge curled upward. The wind shifted. That's when the dog stopped. Ears pricked, then a low growl that rumbled in its chest. Jed lifted his head and felt it before he saw it. A wrongness in the silence, a tear in the fabric of what should be. And then he saw her. She was tied to a tree. Chains, thick and rusted, wrapped tight around her wrists and ankles, biting into her skin. She wore deerskin and oilcloth, soaked and stiff with cold. Blood had dried in the grooves of her face, her long black hair frozen in strands that clung to her cheeks. Her chin was lifted, eyes sharp, not pleading, not broken. Watching, Jed stopped a good 10 paces away, one hand resting on the rifle at his back. The dog whined, unsure. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't speak. Wind cut between them like judgment. He looked at the chains. Thick iron not meant for any ordinary binding. Not a settler's trap. Not even a bounty shackle. These were ceremonial, purposeful. She had been bound not to kill her, but to leave her, left like an offering. Or a punishment. Jed exhaled slowly. He had seen this before, years ago, in another life. He moved closer, step by cautious step, until he stood before her. Her breath came shallow and fast, but she didn't look away, not even when he reached into his coat and pulled free a folding knife, blade glinting. Her wrists were bleeding beneath the frostbite. The iron had rubbed raw. Still, she didn't move. He spoke, finally, "I'm not here to hurt you." No answer. Her eyes held something old, older than fear, older than anger. He slid the blade between chain and skin, careful as a surgeon. It took minutes to find a right weak link. Prying, sawing with patience born from 100 lonely winters. The dog sat beside her now, tail sweeping once in snow. As the last chain loosened, her body collapsed forward. Not from trust, not from surrender, from gravity. Jed caught her. She was small in his arms, but dense with weight that wasn't physical. Her body was all sharp bones and silence. He wrapped his coat around her and lifted her onto the back of his gelding, a shaggy, half-wild creature that huffed but obeyed. She didn't thank him. She didn't speak, but her head rested against his shoulder as he mounted and turned back toward camp. Snow thickened behind them, erasing their tracks like the mountain was trying to forget what had happened. By the time they reached camp, dusk had laid its gray hand across the land. The fire pit still smoked from that morning's embers, and Jed's small lean-to leaned even harder than it had last season. He slid off the horse, then helped her down. She stood on her own, though she swayed like a sapling caught in a sudden thaw. He nodded to the fire. "Sit." She didn't move, so he knelt and rebuilt the flames, stacking pine needles and dry bark with the reverence of someone who knew cold too intimately. The fire caught and flared, orange licking gold across the snow. He rolled out a blanket and gestured again. This time she sat, still no words. From a pot hanging near the lean-to, he ladled warm broth into a tin cup, rabbit and pine root, thin but hot. He offered it to her. Her hands, still raw and swollen, trembled as she took it. She sniffed, then sipped. One swallow, then two. Jed watched without watching. He learned a long time ago that trust couldn't be asked for. It had to be earned or stumbled upon in the quiet hours. He stoked the fire higher and sat across from her, knees aching as he settled on the frozen earth. The dog laid its head on his thigh, sighing. She didn't look at him, but she hadn't run either. The night thickened. Stars winked down through gaps in the cloud cover. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried. Jed finally spoke again, more to the fire than her. "Name's Boone. Jedediah." "Nothing. I'm guessing you don't want to tell me yours." "That's fine." He rubbed a calloused hand over his jaw. The fire cracked, echoing into the stillness. "I seen this before," he said after a while. "Girl tied up like that. Comanche, right? Sometimes. Old ways. Punishment or a cleansing. Never quite understood." Her eyes flicked toward him for the first time. A flash of something. Surprise? Recognition? He held her gaze just long enough, then looked away. "I ain't got much here, but you're welcome to stay till your legs hold." She drank the last of the broth and set the cup down slowly. Her fingers lingered near the fire, absorbing its warmth. Jed unrolled a second blanket and placed it near the fire, not too close, not too far. She watched him, face unreadable. Her lips were cracked, but her spine stayed straight. He laid down on the side of the fire, the dog curling up at his feet. For a long time, neither of them moved. The only sound was a crackling of flame and the occasional rustle of wind-blown snow off the pines. Just before sleep took him, he heard her whisper something. A word in Comanche, soft and thick with frost. He didn't know the meaning, but he heard it. When he woke again, the fire had gone low, and the girl was gone. Panic bloomed for a split second, but then he saw her, not far, sitting under a tree, arms around her knees, watching the horizon. The sky had started bleeding orange into gray, and morning was clawing its way up from the east. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was watching. He stood and walked to her, slow and easy. She didn't move away. He stood beside her without speaking, both of them staring at the same line of trees. Far off, crows circled. Something was coming. He didn't know what, but he knew this. Whatever she had been part of, whatever she had run from or been cast out by, wasn't finished. But neither was she, and neither, it seemed, was he. The wind that morning carried the scent of ashwood and a hush that felt older than speech. Jedediah Boone rose early, as always, stirring the embers into flame with the same quiet reverence he gave most things. Fire, memory, regret. The girl was already awake. She hadn't moved from the spot she'd chosen, not quite inside the lean-to, not quite outside it either. Her knees were drawn to her chest, chin balanced atop them like a statue carved from bone in defiance. She hadn't spoken since the single word whispered the night before. He didn't press her. Words were a form of currency some folks spent too freely. Others, like her, hoarded them like gold. That made them valuable. He set coffee to boil and rabbit fat to warm in the skillet. The dog paced between them, uncertain who to watch, tail held low but curious. Boone caught her eye once across the smoke. Her gaze didn't waver, but there was something new in it, not trust, no, but perhaps the shadow of curiosity. He didn't expect more. "You hungry?" he asked plainly. She didn't nod, but she shifted slightly, like a breeze had moved through her chest. That was enough. He slid her a plate with careful hands. She took it without thanks. Still no words, but her fingers, though split and raw, curled around the warm tin. She ate slowly, with the ritual grace of someone who hadn't had a choice in a long time. He sat back and let the silence build its house between them. As the sun pushed higher and the cold began to lift, Jed worked through camp chores with habitual rhythm, mending the trap line, brushing the horse, checking the lean-to seams. She watched all of it, not lazily, but like a hunter might watch an animal just out of reach. Her eyes were full of questions she refused to ask. At midday, he returned to find her near the fire, feeding it pine needles. She'd moved closer now, crouched on both feet, balanced and alert. He offered her his water skin. This time she took it, drank, and handed it back. "You got a name?" he asked, more out of kindness than expectation. Her lips parted, then closed again. He saw the choice happen in her face. She wasn't ready to give anything. Not yet. "All right," he said, wiping the rim and taking a sip himself. "I'll call you what the fire calls you. Quiet." She blinked. A breath passed. He almost thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch, but it vanished. That evening, when the sky deepened to bruised lavender and the trees whispered in the darkening wind, two riders passed not far from a ridge. Jed knew the sound before he saw them. Settler boots, iron-shod hooves, voices careless in the stillness. He stood just outside the firelight, watching through the needles. They saw the smoke and veered close enough to shout. "Boone! That you?" one called. Jed stepped into view. "You know it is." The second rider leaned forward, peering toward the camp. "Heard tell you when half mad up here. Been too long since you come to town." "Who's the girl?" Jed didn't answer. The first rider nudged his horse forward, peering past him. "She Comanche?" Jed's jaw tensed. "Looks like she's got the mark," the man said. "You know what that means, right? They chain their own when they dishonor the tribe. You Taquinan traders now, Boone?" Jed said nothing. The second man spat in the snow. "That's bad medicine. You best think hard on who you shelter. They'll come looking." Jed didn't move. "You done?" The man stared a beat longer, then pulled the reins. "Don't say we didn't warn you." The two rode off, disappearing into the curtain of trees. Their hoofbeats echoed like hammers until the woods swallowed them whole. When Jed turned back to the camp, she was standing, not behind the fire, but beside it. Her eyes were sharp again, but not with fear, something more dangerous, understanding. He stoked the fire higher and sat, not speaking. She moved across the flames and sat opposite him. For a long time, they only listened to the wood pop and the fire hiss. The shadows danced on her face, revealing bruises and dry blood the snow hadn't cleaned. She stared into the flames with a look he knew well. "You hear what they said?" he asked. She nodded once. "You know they'll come again. Men like that don't let rumors rest." She nodded again, slower. Jed leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't know why you were chained out there. Ain't my place to ask. But I reckon whoever did it didn't intend for you to walk away. So you're either marked for punishment or you're a witness." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in offense but calculation, like she was measuring the shape of what he'd just said. "Either way," he continued, "you're here now, and if they come, they'll deal with me first." She studied him for a long moment. Then she pointed to the knife hanging on his belt. He handed it to her. She pulled the blade out, inspected the edge, then returned it without a word. It was not a threat. It was a gesture. Jed nodded. He understood that language better than English most days. Later that night, while the stars burned through a clear sky and the moon carved its pale light across the snowbanks, Jed reached for the old pipe he hadn't touched in years. He packed it with tobacco from a small pouch and lit it with a twig from a fire. The scent rose between them, smoky and sweet. She watched him draw, then surprised him by extending her hand. He passed the pipe across. She took one long inhale, exhaled into the firelight, and handed it back. Still no names, no reasons, just that. He took the final draw and knocked the ash into the snow. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Long time ago. Her name's not important. She had your eyes, though, wild like the edge of the world. Married her. Lost her too soon." The girl didn't move. "I ain't been back to town in years. Got a boy buried there. Folks still whisper my name like a warning." She looked at him then, not with pity but recognition, like two mirrors catching the same ghost between them. A gust of wind stirred the trees and the fire bent with it, flames rippling low. He pulled his coat tighter. The dog whimpered and curled nearer to the heat. She reached out and added more wood without being asked. That was the moment. The smallest things meant everything, and Jed knew it. Not her story, not her name, just that she stayed, that she fed the fire. They didn't speak the rest of the night, but something had shifted. Not trust, not peace, but the first thread of something mended. Before he lay down, he handed her his extra blanket. She took it. No resistance, no pride. He laid beside the fire with the dog warming his back, and the stars overhead like a dome of brittle glass. She lay on the other side, facing away, but before sleep took him, he heard her whisper again. Another Comanche word, too soft to understand but heavy with meaning. This time, he didn't need to know what it meant. It was enough that she said aloud. The fire was dying when she stirred. Jed noticed first in the stillness how her shoulders straightened, not from cold but from attention far older. Her eyes didn't blink, and her breath came sharp. She was listening, not to the crackle of wood or the wind on canvas, but to something deeper, something beyond. A silence that was no longer empty, but full. He didn't ask what she heard. He felt it, too. It was the way the birds had gone quiet, how even the dog refused to lift its head, pretending to sleep. The forest had changed language overnight. What had been solitude had become warning. She stood with the deliberate grace of someone raised to move without sound. Her head turned west, where the trees grew denser and the ridgelines deeper. Her lips parted like she might speak, but still no words came. Instead, she stepped toward the edge of camp, her fingers curling at her sides, pulse showing in her neck. Jed rose slow. His knees popped. Old bones tried to warn him of younger sins. He followed her gaze into the pines. The snow was untouched, but the air vibrated with memory, like thunder before the storm. "You know what's out there," he said, not a question. She nodded. "How many?" She drew her hand across the air. 4 fingers in a fist, then one more finger lifted like a blade. 41. Jed's throat dried. His hand rested on a rifle slung by the lean-to, though it felt more like habit than hope. He'd seen war parties before, back when he rode under a flag he no longer respected. 41 riders did not come for parley. They came to reclaim, or punish. She turned to him then, and for the first time spoke in English. "My father leads them." The words were brittle, sharp-edged, but her voice held weight beyond its sound. A truth spoken not to explain, but to confess. Jed gave a slow nod. That's a mighty storm to bring down on a campfire. Her eyes didn't leave his. He thinks I shamed him. By surviving? By refusing? There was no need to ask what she'd refused. The chains had said enough. Old customs bound to old wounds. Jed looked west again. "He mean to take you back?" "If I go, I die slow. If I stay, he dies fast." That was the whole war, wrapped in 2 lines. He moved to the ridge, glassed the tree lean with a worn spyglass. The sun was still low, streaking the snow with pale gold. No movement yet, but it was coming. The kind of silence that arrives before hooves break it. When he turned back, she was stacking wood. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Making fire stronger. That's not going to stop 40 men." "No," she said, "but it will keep us warm while we wait." There was a quiet nobility in it, in the way she didn't run, didn't beg, like she'd already lived too long with surrender and would rather stand in the open than hide behind mercy. Jed went to lean-to and checked the rifle. 2 full cartridges. A sidearm with 1 bullet left. Not enough for the numbers. Not enough for her father's fury. He walked to the horse, unstrapped the flare gun from the saddlebag. "Calling ghosts?" she asked. "Old friend," Jed replied. "If he's alive, he'll come." She raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. The flare cracked upward into the pale sky, a streak of red smoke curling above the pine canopy. It would be seen, and it would be remembered. They waited. By midday, the drumming began, holes like thunder, low and steady, echoing off rock and tree. Not a charge, a procession, deliberate, meaningful. Wyatt stood at the edge of camp, hair braided back, face painted in ash and pine soot. She wore the silence like armor. Jed stood beside her, hands open, rifle slung but untouched. They came over the ridge in waves, riders in full war paint, feathers and bone, lances tipped in obsidian. 40 of them. And at the center, a man on a dark horse, cloak made of buffalo hide, lined in red beads. His eyes were black and still as a pond before a storm. Jed knew who he was before the girl spoke. "That is Nacon." Her father sat tall. He did not dismount. They didn't speak at first. It wasn't necessary. The campfire crackled. The horse snorted. The mountain held its breath. Then Nacon lifted a hand. One rider stepped forward, bow notched but lowered. He looked young, too young, but his face was already lined with blood and pride. Jed raised his hand in return. No one here drew arms. Nacon finally spoke. "You took her." Jed shook his head. I found her. She is mine. She is her own. A long silence, then a word in Comanche. Sharp, commanding. The young warrior raised his bow. Wyatt stepped forward, not with fear, but with fire. She speaks now, Jed murmured. I speak for myself, she called, voice echoing across the snow. Nakon's face did not move. You broke the binding. The law. I broke a chain. Same thing. No, she said. A chain is for captives. The law is for people. He blinked once, then again, as if her words had struck a part of him deeper than bone. She was left to die, Jed said, stepping beside her. And I don't care for the kind of laws that call that justice. She defied the elders, Nacon snapped. She would not wed. She would not kneel. I gave her mercy. You gave her silence, Jed replied. She survived anyway. Another breath passed. Then the young warrior rode forward. Too fast, eyes blazing, bow drawn not to threaten but to kill. Jed stepped in front of Wyatt without thinking, rifle still slung. The shot would hit him first. That was fine, but the shot never came. A crack echoed from the ridge. The young warrior's bowstring snapped mid-pull. He yelped, hand sliced by the whip of it. His horse reared, nearly throwing him. All heads turned. There, on the ridge above the camp, stood a man in a tattered Union duster, rifle slung low, smoke curling from the muzzle. His mustache was longer than most men's patience, and his eyes were carved from Appalachian stone. Gideon, Jed said softly, smiling without joy. Gideon raised a hand in lazy salute. Heard you were making friends again. Wyatt looked between them, brow furrowed. That's the ghost I called, Jed explained. Nakon's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. Slight. Enough. We came for her, the chief said. She's not yours anymore, Jed answered. She is blood. She's choice. That hung in the air like a judgment. Nacon dismounted. The others tensed, but he waved them back. He walked within 3 paces of his daughter, looked at her, not with anger, but with something darker, grief. You would live with them? He asked, voice low. I would live, she replied. His jaw tightened. Then you are no longer of us. She reached up and undid her braid, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. A symbol, Jed knew, of departure, of self. I never was, she said. He closed his eyes, just once, then turned without another word and walked back to his horse. The warriors followed. No arrows loosed, no blood spilled. As the last rider crested the ridge, Gideon slid down from his perch and joined them by the fire. Thought you'd be dead by now, he said, offering Jed a canteen. Wasn't for lack of trying. He looked to Wyatt. She the reason? Jed nodded. She's the reason. Gideon sat beside the fire and shook his head. Always knew you'd die for a woman. Maybe I won't. Wyatt took the canteen, drank, then passed it to Jed. For the first time, she looked not like a shadow, but like a spark, small, persistent, refusing to dim. Jed leaned back on his palms and stared at the sky. It had begun to snow again, light flakes drifting like forgiveness. She still ain't told me her name, he murmured. She doesn't have to, Gideon said. She's told you everything else. And she had. That night, the fire burned higher than it had in days. Not because of wood, but because of will. They didn't talk much, just shared warmth, shared space. In the dark, when sleep hovered close, Jed looked over to where she lay and said, almost himself, storm came. She opened her eyes, and it passed. Not over, but through, and that made all the difference. The sun dipped low behind the ridgeline, dragging the warmth with it, and the pines stretched long shadows over the snow like the fingers of some ancient god trying to pull the land into sleep. The air cooled fast, that hard, biting kind of cold that settled not on the skin, but somewhere deeper, into bones, into memory. Jedediah Boone fed the fire again, slowly, carefully, laying down pine logs like offerings. There was no more riding tonight, no running, either. The night was too wide and too still for that. Gideon had built a rough perimeter with tied bells and taut strings along the tree line. Nothing fancy, just enough to whisper of intruders. He sat sharpening his knife now, one leg folded, his breath puffing little clouds in the air. Waya sat cross-legged across the fire from Jed, her face painted only in the orange light of flame. Her braid was gone, her hair loose and wild, brushing her cheekbones when the wind blew through camp. She had said little since the riders left, but silence no longer felt like distance. It had taken shape, filled with something slow and growing. A silence shared was no longer silence. It was space. "You did a thing most wouldn't," Gideon said without looking up, standing between her and her own blood. Jed didn't answer at first. He watched the sparks rise, curling upward like stories untold. "Didn't feel brave," he muttered. "Felt like the only thing left I could do that made sense." "She's got a fire in her," Gideon said. "I seen it. Most men rather face death than their own kin's judgment. She did both." Waya looked down at her hands. She was wrapping the wounds on her wrists with clean cloth Jed had left by the blankets. Her fingers were careful, precise. No waste in the movement. She'd grown quieter since the confrontation, but not smaller. If anything, something had settled in her. A kind of stillness, not peace, but something close. A kind of earned place in her own skin. Jed reached over, poured hot water into a battered tin cup. He passed it to her, without speaking. She took it without hesitation. "You always live like this?" she asked suddenly, the first words in hours. Her voice was soft but shaped. Jed nodded. "Since the boy passed. Before that, I had a house, fence land, even tried planting once. Didn't take. Some things ain't meant to root." She sipped. The steam curled up past her cheek. "Why'd you help me?" He stared into fire. "Because I knew what it meant to be left behind by your own kind." Gideon grunted. "And because he's got a hero complex the size of Colorado." Jed chuckled under his breath, but the truth lay elsewhere, deeper than banter. He glanced at Waya, who stared back now. Her eyes were less guarded than before. Not open, exactly, but not walled shut either. "I once loved a Comanche woman," Jed said. "Long time back. Her name was Muna. Your age, maybe younger. Fierce. Smarter than me in 4 languages." Waya's face didn't change, but she leaned slightly forward. "She taught me things I didn't deserve to learn. About her people. About stories. About shame. We married in our way. Lived quiet out near Silver Creek. She died in childbirth. Took our son with her. Never buried him right. I think that's why I can't leave these hills." "I'm sorry," Waya said, and it wasn't empty. "Don't be," he said. "Just means I understand what it feels like to lose your voice and keep breathing." Silence returned, but was fuller now, like the ground after rain. Night pressed down thicker. The stars blinked hard and white in the black sky, and the moon peeked through shifting clouds. The forest around them stayed hushed, but there was no sense of danger, just the long breath of something resting. Waya stood suddenly and walked a few paces from the fire. Jed followed her with his eyes, but didn't get up. She crouched in the snow, began gathering something in her hands. Berries, crushed charcoal from the fire, melted snow water. She worked without speaking, kneeling in the flickering edge of light, like someone tending a shrine. "What's she doing?" Gideon asked. "Chewing on a strip of dried elk meat." "Don't know," Jed said. "But she ain't running, so I'll let her be." Waya returned a little later with a bowl made from bark, the mixture inside thick and dark as ink. She sat before Jed and studied his face with the focus of a carver studying wood. "May I?" she asked. He blinked. "What for?" "Paint," she said. "Not for war. For witness." Jed hesitated, but something in her tone left no room for vanity or pride. He nodded. She dipped 2 fingers into the mixture and touched his brow, dragging a single line down to his chin, then a line across each cheekbone. The marks were cool and faintly sweet, with crushed berries. "You stood between the blade and the body," she said. "That makes you not warrior, but wall. That's sacred." Jed swallowed thickly, unsure what to say. I will remember you, she added. Don't need remembering, he said quietly. We all do, she replied, especially the ones who think they don't. When she finished, she painted 2 streaks on her own cheeks, smaller but mirroring his. Gideon watched, eyes narrowed, then turned back to his knife. Can't say I've seen anything like this since the territories. Different kind of strength. Later, when the fire burned low and the wind began to howl in soft warnings, Wyatt took the remaining cloth and laid it beside Jed's bedroll. For your dreams, she said. He looked at her, puzzled. To tie them up, she explained, so they don't run wild. He smiled at that, a slow, tired curve. If you saw the kind I have, you'd know they're wild already. I had one last night, she said, sitting cross-legged again. My mother was singing, not to me, to a tree. She said if it listened long enough, it would bend toward the voice. That's a dream worth tying down, Jed said. She gave a small nod. Her eyes closed for a moment, her head tilted, as if listening for something not quite in this world. You afraid of tomorrow? He asked, softer now. Yes, she said, but I've already died once. This part's just what I do with the rest. It was Gideon who spoke next, voice gravel dry. I'll stay through dawn, just in case. You don't have to, Jed said. I know. That's why it matters. The fire burned low. Jed added the last log and sat back. Wyatt pulled her blanket around her shoulders. She didn't look cold anymore. Above them, clouds shifted. The moon was full now, casting silver across the snow. The whole camp glowed faintly, like something holy, like a secret the world wasn't meant to keep. Jed leaned on his elbow, eyes half closed. You think your father will come again? No, Wyatt said. Not as war. That part's done. What now then? She looked into the dark. Now comes the part where we choose what kind of silence we live with. He nodded slowly, lying back. The sky stretched forever. The wind curled into the camp like an old story returning home. In the quiet, he heard her humming something under her breath. A song not meant to be remembered, but it was maybe a lullaby, maybe a goodbye. And for the first time in years, Jed Boone slept without dreaming of graves. Morning waited beyond the ridge, not yet visible, but certain. The frost came early with the dawn, laying thin white film over saddle leather and rifle steel, over the rough bark of pine and the dark edges of boots long broken in. Jedediah Boone opened his eyes to a world glowing in a cold hush, moon still hanging, sun barely peeking, and the dog beside him already up and pacing. The fire had long since guttered the coals, but the warmth clung to ground like a secret. He sat up slow, muscles creaking, and looked across to where Wyatt stood on the rise. Her blanket hung from her shoulders like a cloak, hair moving gently with the breeze, eyes fixed west. She hadn't moved all night. Or maybe she had, and the world moved with her. Gideon crouched by the camp's edge, watching the tree line, chewing on a piece of bark like it might give him answers. His rifle lay across his knees, hands relaxed but ready. They're coming, Wyatt said softly without turning. Jed didn't ask how she knew. Some things were inherited, others remembered. He moved beside her, following her gaze. 3 riders crested the ridge, not Comanche, not war-painted. Settlers. One wore the badge of the county law, dull brass pin to a dust-colored coat. Another carried a shotgun, eyes narrow, lips curled in suspicion even from this far. The third was younger. Probably hadn't seen a winter that didn't come with someone else's orders. They rode slow, deliberately, but behind them, further off, more shadows shifted. A gathering. No torches. But the intent was clear in the lines of their movement. You were right, Gideon said. Town didn't take kindly to rumors. Jed nodded. They came to finish a story they never started. Wyatt turned toward them. They think I don't belong. Jed met her eyes. They think a woman who survives without asking permission is a threat. She didn't flinch. So what do? We stand. The riders came to a stop just outside the small ring of pine that held the camp. Horses snorting steam, boots creaking in stirrups. The sheriff dismounted first. His face was weathered but not cruel, The kind of man who once believed in rules until they disappointed him one too many times. He raised a hand. Boone. Jed stepped forward. Sheriff. Got reports. You took in a girl. Native. Bound in iron. She wasn't taken. She was left. I found her. The sheriff nodded once, slowly. Some say you're harboring trouble. Trouble's what happens when folks don't mind their own. The man with the shotgun spoke next, impatient. She's one of them. Doesn't matter what she did. She's got blood on her hands, just being born. Wyatt stepped forward then, past Jed, her voice clear as bell steel. If my blood's a crime, then so is yours, because it spilled mine first. That cut deeper than any bullet. The sheriff didn't reply, but he glanced back. More figures appeared at the ridge. 8, maybe 10. Others watched from trees, faces half hidden, but eyes full of judgment. Jed saw it then, not an army, but a gathering of fear. These weren't soldiers. They were settlers looking for reason to feel safe again. And that reason, they decided, was to make her disappear. She's no prisoner, Jed said. No thief. No threat. One of the townsfolk called out, voice shaking. She brought warriors. What do they come again? They came because of what you left in the snow. Gideon barked. You chain a daughter. Her kin will follow. She didn't call for them. But she didn't run from them, either. The sheriff raised his hand. We ain't here to make war. Then go home, Jed said, because if you take one step further, that's what you'll get. The man with the shotgun cocked it. Don't talk like you got numbers, Boone. You're just 3, and one of you's already old. Gideon smiled with a kind of grin that made other men shift their stance. Old don't mean slow. Just means I shoot less and hit more. The tension coiled tight. The dog barked once, sharp. Then something shifted. From the opposite ridge, where no one looked, hoofbeats rose. A single rider appeared, no war paint, no weapons drawn. It was Nacon. He rode slow, solemn, like a man crossing sacred ground. His hair was tied back, feathers stripped, markings faded by snow. He dismounted without word, walked forward. The townsfolk stirred. Jed watched, breath caught between ribs. Wyatt moved toward her father, not rushing, not retreating. He stopped before her, eyes soft and deep as canyon shadows. He looked tired, more man than chief now. I came not to take, he said in a low voice, just for her. Then why? She asked. To see, if your eyes changed, if mine could. She didn't smile, but her face broke open with something raw. You left me, she whispered. I thought I had no choice. You always had a choice. He nodded. Then this is mine now. He turned to the gathering crowd of settlers. I am Nacon. I came with 40. I left with none. They ride their path. I ride mine. The sheriff looked at Jed, then at Wyatt. She stays, the sheriff said finally. The man with the shotgun lowered it, uncertain. She stays, Gideon echoed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She stood at the center now, painted not in war, but in will. Her silence wasn't retreat. It was command. The sheriff looked around, eyes finding no army, no cause, just people weary of ghosts. He nodded. Then this is done. He turned his horse. The others followed. Not fast, not proud, just done. Gideon let out a breath and uncocked his rifle. Well, hell. Jed didn't move. Not until the last shadow vanished from the ridge. Then he turned to Wyatt. You still want to stay? She looked at him, then at the ashes of the fire, at the empty place where her chains once lay. She walked to the edge of the camp, stood facing the rising sun. After a long moment, she said, I want to begin. Jed nodded. Then we start again. Gideon packed his kit, gave one last glance, and tipped his hat. I'll see you boys down the line. You know how to find me. Jed watched him vanish into trees and light. He turned to her, hands empty. What now? He asked. She picked up a stone, smoothed by river time, and placed it beside the fire pit. Now we build. They worked through morning. Quiet, steady, The lean-to became a frame for something more. Logs stacked with care, not for shelter from the cold, but from the world outside the trees. By dusk they had walls, a roof line, even a new fire circle, set with stones and ringed in pine branches. They sat together by that fresh flame, shoulders touching just slightly, not speaking, just existing in the kind of stillness earned only after war. And when the stars came out, she sang. Not loud, not proud, just a song for herself, for the stand she took, for the silence that roared, for the girl in chains who became a woman unbroken. And Jed listened, not as a rescuer, not as a savior, just a man who once watched the world burn and now watched something grow from its ashes. The night closed in again, but this time it felt like home.